In Duels of the Roses, it's easy to feel extremely weak at the start of a new playthrough. Enemies seem to bring up monsters with thousands of attack power, and have traps that destroy the few strong cards you have. But there is something you can do. From the very start of the game, with any starter deck, and any level of knowledge, that will make your deck convincingly strong enough to destroy the entire game with little to no effort. So once we've actually started the game and saved in the overworld, whether you're stuck at the very start of the game or stuck later on, you can simply exit back to the main menu and go into the custom duel to access the custom duel feature. Now that you're in the custom duel menu, you should be pitched against Deckmaster K. The game puts you against Deckmaster S if you have a memory card in the second slot that has no Duels of the Roses save file, so if you see Deckmaster S and you're playing on the emulator, you need to go into the memory card settings and eject the memory card from the second slot, exit the custom duel menu, go back in, and you'll be pitched against Deckmaster K. I will talk more about Deckmaster S later on, but let's talk about Deckmaster K right now. Deckmaster K is a simple AI opponent that uses an exact copy of your deck. Like all opponents in the overworld, you can duel against it, and if you win, you will get the Graveyard Slot Reel minigame. In the Graveyard Slot Reels, you have a chance to gain a copy of your deck leader, plus the cards that are in your opponent's graveyard. This includes monsters that they fused, it includes power-ups and spells they used, trap cards you triggered, and also any card that you destroyed. Also note that if you can see Deckmaster K fuse monsters in their hand, you can check the graveyard to see what monsters they fused into the graveyard, and then when you attack that monster, or it attacks you and it reveals itself, you will see the monster that they created by combining the two monsters in the graveyard. Make sure to keep track of these, in case your opponent plays something really strong, because this literally teaches you what you can create in your own deck via fusion, which will result in some of the most powerful cards you can actually play with the contents of your deck. Now, you can just play casually against Deckmaster K and use it to learn the ropes of the game, no problem, but I'll show you how we can actually beat Deckmaster K really easily and consistently. The first thing you should do is make sure you are dueling Deckmaster K on a map that boosts the most common monster type in your deck. Start your first move by moving your deck leader forward, and then play something boosted by the terrain in the top left tile. Flip it up and move it 2 spaces forward. Now on your second turn, send that same monster 2 tiles forward again so that it's to the right side of your opponent's deck leader, and move your own deck leader forward 1 space. Now on the third turn, you can attack their deck leader with the first monster you played, and because they moved forward, you can play another monster boosted by the terrain and flip it up and attack your opponent. If you have 4000 attack or higher across both of these attacks, you actually will just kill them instantly in 3 turns, which makes this process really fast. Now, I will stress again that you can just play this duel out normally if you don't draw 2 monsters boosted by the terrain, but this setup can really fasten the process of defeating Deckmaster K over and over and over again. The benefit of doing this is that you can gain copies of your deck leader faster, and also get fusion materials and hopefully equips faster. But you will get virtually no copies of the monster they fused unless you destroy it, but you can always decide on the fly if you want to destroy that monster in the duel or play it out longer, but basically you just want to get the jump on the opponent early so that you can just end the duel whenever you want, and it'll make this overall process really stress-free. Also, don't forget to edit the powerful cards into your deck as you earn them between duels so that your opponent is more likely to play more good cards. And also, don't forget to save as you go in case something goes wrong. You won't always get the exact cards you want, but the more the merrier, as you have more flexibility, and some cards that aren't obviously strong to you may be useful at some point against a certain duel, or if you eventually figure out a nice fusion with them. Sometimes even the most boring and innocuous seeming card can actually be incredibly strong. Apart from that though, there are some cards in the game that are always good, and these cards are your highest priority to go for in the graveyard slots until you have 3 of them. Power-up cards, in my opinion, are your biggest priority. They're the reason why you feel weaker than most opponents. They're the reason why some duelers can play monsters out of nowhere that have 4000 attack. They're the reason why Mai is one of the strongest duelers in the game and why Tristan is one of the weakest. They are always good. Not only are they able to make your mediocre cards very strong, they're able to make your strongest monsters insanely overpowered. They're also low deck cost, which means you can always fit them into your deck. In my opinion, if you just have 3 copies of all the power-ups in your deck, you're already strong enough to beat the whole game without any further advice. If you consider stacking 3 power-ups on any of your strongest monster, you boost their attack and defense by 1500, which will be enough to make them beat a Meteor Black Dragon. Terrain cards are the most powerful spells in any starter deck that comes packaged with them. They are much harder to come by, which is why I listed them after power-ups, but if you see them in the graveyard, prioritize them over everything. Not only are they the most impactful spells you can play in any duel from the starter deck, they're honestly some of the most impactful spells you can play across the entire game, period. I'm not joking when I say that terrain advantage in this game is blatantly overpowered, and if you're able to even activate just 1 terrain spell in the duel, you can change the advantage of attack and defense power anywhere in your favor from up to 2000, like unironically. Having 2 or 3 copies in your deck instead of 1 just means you're more likely to see one early, and is also less likely to have that 1 copy be at the bottom of your deck, where it's too late to have a good impact in the duel. Not to mention, obviously, being able to cover more terrain by activating more than 1 of them in different positions. But Deckmaster K will pretty much never activate these, so to get this, you'll have to just attack over your opponent's cards over and over again in a duel, constantly, to get one of these. And then check the graveyard if you ever attack over something that isn't a monster or a trap card, and if you see the terrain card in the graveyard, end that duel as soon as possible and try to land on that card every single reel, because these cards are stupidly overpowered. After that, any spells or traps that do pretty much anything decent are also quite useful. I would say that these are your 3rd highest priority. It is up to you to decide what spells seem strong and good, and also traps, as most starter decks don't actually come packaged with too many insanely useful spells other than the terrain cards. But there are some outliers, such as the spell cards that increase the attack and defense of one type of monster by 600, a powerful spell like Dimension Hole, or a trap card such as Mesmeric Control from the Illusory Gentleman starter deck. These are definitely worth duplicating, getting 3 copies of. Even a card like Cursebreaker is super useful to have multiple copies of. You can bait the opponent into attacking it, and it will remove all the power-ups the enemy put on that card, and it's also 1 deck cost, so you can really drop the deck cost of your deck just by having 3 of these in the deck. Fusion materials are a very important priority if the monsters they created are really powerful. Fusion materials are often better than just getting the resulting powerful fusion monsters, as you can keep your deck costs low, and also keep a low average summoning power. It also allows you to play those fusions more consistently and multiple times more. If you only fill your deck with monsters that have a high summoning power and high deck cost, you'll brick in the hand very often, and your deck cost will also be very high, which it needs to be lower than the opponent to progress through the game, so you want to fill most of your deck with lower stuff to make sure you're under the threshold, keep your summoning power low, and that's overall a better way to build the deck. In saying that, however, if you do duplicate your highest attack, strongest cards, you can still afford to put a few of these in your deck if you fill the rest of your deck with low SP and low deck cost cards, plenty of equips and other spells and traps that have a lower deck cost. For some decks, the actual deck leader is one of the better cards you can duplicate in a casual playthrough. Some of the best example of these are deck leaders with powerful effects that boost your own monsters, such as Fairy King Truesdale, Malta Behemoth, and Serpentine Princess. If you have any of these starter decks with a deck leader that has an effect that boosts your own monsters' attack and defense, definitely duplicate these. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, Tactical Warrior cannot be duplicated in the graveyard slots, but there is a password for this card that you can enter to give yourself a copy of that card, and don't feel guilty at all for doing this, because really the game should just let you get bonus copies of this card if it lets you get bonus copies of the other ones. I would say this is an oversight that you can't, so whatever. Either that, or just a really awful game design choice. But anyways, other examples, such as King Tiger Wanghu, this monster can always move 2 tiles when it's face up, which is actually an insanely powerful effect. And then there are even other cards such as Patrician of Darkness. Doesn't really have any effect at all, but it's still a reasonably high attack monster for a sort of medium deck cost and summoning power range that, even just on Yami with an equip or 2, it can destroy most opponents' monsters, and that'll have a pretty high impact in the duel over some other chunky cards that aren't as good. Again, having a few monsters with high SP and high deck cost is fine, so long as you don't have too many, but again, it's your final priority, as you'll only really have wiggle room to add these cards once you've actually balanced your deck and built it a lot better. Before I listed the cards you want to add into your deck, I did mention before to add them in as you go, and this ties into the most basic deck building advice I have. Look at the best card in your chest that you want to add, then look at the card in your deck that you want to keep the least, and replace that with the card you want to add in. If you just keep doing this until you no longer feel like you have any cards you want to take out of the deck, your deck will be so much better than it started. Over time, our deck goes from being a random assortment of cards to a fully fledged powerful deck that is really strong enough to blitz through the entire game. And true story, I actually got a 3 in a row while recording slot reel footage, which is not too surprising because I was doing it for ages, and I actually realized that I totally neglected to talk about the untapped potential of how powerful you can make a starter deck at the start of the game by using 3 in a row rares. Of course, this is not a fully reliable strategy, but anyone can do this theoretically if you eventually get a 3 in a row. If you line up 3 of the same cards in the graveyard slots, you'll randomly receive one of 22 powerful rare prize cards, some of them being way more powerful than others. I do plan on doing a full video talking about the slot rare mechanics at some point and going into more detail about that, so please leave a comment if you'd like to see a full video on that. Just like actually let me know, because I do read the comments. But in the meantime, here are the cards that you can be given by getting 3 in a row. Some of these are just really powerful monsters that are good at all points in the game, such as Skull Knight or Blue Eyes White Dragon. Some of them are monsters with useful effects, such as Cannon Soldier, which can cut through labyrinth tiles and turn them into normal so they can move through labyrinth tiles. Some of them are honestly not very good at all, such as Flame Swordsman. I mean, that card's just not good, like, period. While monsters like Barrel Dragon and Labyrinth Tank also have more synergy with, for example, a machine deck that will contain some power-ups for it and like limit removal, they're still very useful cards in any deck, and that goes for like all the high attack monsters, really. Some of the rares, such as Toon Summon Skull, are actually more effective if you're against a specific opponent, such as Pegasus, who has a lot of Toon terrain on the field. Now, most of these cards aren't actually obtainable outside of 3 in a row rare, but some of these monsters, such as Red Eyes Black Dragon and Dark Magician, can actually be farmed in the graveyard slots and duplicated after you've obtained a single copy of them. So if you get Red Eyes Black Dragon as a 3 in a row rare, and then you put that in your deck once you receive it, then you can go back to Deckmaster K with that Red Eyes Black Dragon in your deck and farm more of them. Again, as a bonus tip, if you're trying to farm high SP cards, make sure you bump up the SP recharge rate in the custom duel options as high as possible. Just put it up to 12. That means your opponent will just always play the highest attack card that's in their hand every single time. There are also 3 in a row prizes you can get by lining up 3 of one specific card that will always give you one specific card. So if you line up 3 Dark Energies, you always get Dark Hole. I'm going to include that list in the description as well, in addition to the full list if you ever want to copy and paste it for whatever reason. But wait! There is one more step that you can do that is totally optional because this takes forever, so I don't seriously expect you to do this at all. But if you rank up your deck leader in the custom duel, you can eventually receive 1 or more leader abilities that can boost the attack and defense of your allies. For a quick refresh, the best way to rank monsters up is to have as many copies face up on the field and just skip turns while your opponent makes as few inputs as possible. To do this at the start of the game, it's not as fast, but there are a couple ways to cheese this. The best way I've found is actually to select the Crush map in the custom duel, because if your opponent wants to play a monster with 1500 attack or higher, they will just play literally nothing and pass their turn. And then what you can do is change the terrain around your own deck leader with your own terrain spell card, and then just play monsters face up, and pass your turn, and rank your monsters up. Now, ranking takes a really long time, and takes even longer the higher the rank your monster is, so on the screen I've got some recommended thresholds of monsters that receive some really strong benefits if you rank them up. Ranking a monster all the way up to Secondary Defense will unironically take you several hours, even during the most optimal ranking strategy, but some monsters actually get really good benefits really quickly, so if you really just want to be fancy, Rank these monsters up and you'll actually go from being strong to actually being super overpowered. Leader abilities are low-key some of the most broken things in the game, so yeah. Remember that you can only have 3 copies of a monster in your deck, but if you fusion summon that monster with other cards, you can have up to the max of 5 on the field. And if you have 5 of the same monster on the field and just pass turns while your opponent does nothing, this is unironically the fastest way, time-wise, to rank your monsters up in the entire game. I haven't found any strategy faster than this, and yes, this still takes about 5.5 hours to max a rank out, so this is totally optional, but if you choose a monster you can fuse as your target to rank up, you can rank up a lot faster than ranking up a non-fusion if you choose to do this. Earlier, I mentioned Deckmaster S, and this is the duelist you get pitched against in the custom duel if you have a memory card in the second slot that does not contain a Duelist of the Roses save file. You can do this in the emulator just by creating a blank memory card and putting it in the second slot. And even on your actual PS2, if you have any spare PlayStation 2 memory cards lying around, as long as they don't have a Duelist of the Roses save file, you can put it in your second memory card slot, go to the custom duel, and duel Deckmaster S. Deckmaster S has a variety of cards that you may or may not find useful. Best example is probably a Manga Ryu-Ran. If you have a dragon deck, for example, this will just give you a really strong dragon, and it's also strong on Toon Terrain, so that becomes really useful against a duel such as Pegasus. But the real MVP though is Deckmaster T. This is a way more farmable opponent. Deckmaster T is an Exodia deck, but don't be intimidated because it's actually a very poor, pathetic AI with a bunch of Exodia cards and a bunch of cards that just stole you. To duel Deckmaster T, you just need any PlayStation 1 memory card in the second slot, and then enter the custom duel. You're not actually here to gain Exodia pieces. In fact, Exodia pieces don't actually show up in the graveyard slots whatsoever, but you're actually here to gain his trap cards. Not just any trap cards, but pretty much most of them. Pretty much all the good trap cards you could possibly want that you actually can gain in the graveyard slots are in this deck. And because Deckmaster T just only really has Exodia pieces and stall cards, you can just play as aggressively as possible, and Deckmaster T will basically never accomplish anything but just slow you down trying to kill it, and in that process, as long as you're rushing Deckmaster T until you beat him, you would trigger its trap cards, send them to the graveyard, then you win, then you get a chance to obtain these trap cards, and again you can do this as much as you want until you get all the trap cards that you want and as many copies as you want. There are a handful of trap cards you can obtain from Deckmaster T that spellbind opponents, and also potentially reduce their attack power, and these are really powerful cards. They're really powerful against the AI specifically because the AI pretty much always attacks into your cards when they're face down, so you can just play these face down and send them towards the enemy and let them attack into them, and it will just destroy their monsters. It'll really mess them up. My 2 personal favorites though are Mesmeric Control and Shadow Spell. Mesmeric Control is pretty low deck cost, and it may only spellbind for 1 turn, but it also reduces an opponent's monster's attack and defense by 800, which is actually quite a lot. I think Mesmeric Control is a card that you can fit 3 of in any starter deck, and it just gives you an option to shut down an opponent's strong monster and be able to attack over it in a pinch, so this is a really solid card for any deck. Shadow Spell is twice the deck cost, but it's also one of the strongest cards you can obtain in the graveyard slots in the entire game, in my opinion. When it's triggered, it reduces the monster's attack and defense by 1,000 each and spellbinds them for 3 turns. Don't forget to consider the possibility of your opponents attacking into 2 or 3 trap cards even. Being able to reduce an opponent's Blue Eyes White Dragon's attack by 2,000 if they attack into 2 Shadow Spells means you can beat over that card with pretty much any weak card in your deck. If you have access to Deckmaster T, I think that all starter decks can really benefit from adding even a few trap cards into the deck. Any number between 1 and 5 I think will just really boost a deck, and if your deck cost is already high, just consider using the lower deck cost traps, and if your deck cost is low, consider putting in like 3 Shadow Spells. Just do what you feel is correct. As long as you have a few trap cards in the deck, this can really boost any deck, no matter what deck it is. It will just help you out a lot in the single player campaign. I would also like to mention that you can dual Deckmaster I if you have a Pocket Station in the second memory card slot, but they never sold these outside of Japan, so it's up to you to look for one on eBay or something if you don't already have one. Deckmaster I has Immortals in their deck, but it's also a pain in the ass to defeat, so good luck with that. Also, if you're emulating the game on PCSX2 1.6 and you try to put in a PlayStation 1 memory card in the second slot, it actually gives you Deckmaster I instead of T for whatever reason, so yeah, you can have fun with that if you like, but I feel like at this point we're not even talking about a starter deck anymore if you're just going to fill it up with Immortals and stuff, so maybe don't do that, yeah. Alright, so I've rambled long enough about how to become overpowered, so now it's actually time to show some examples of these methods in action. Let's start with an upgraded Maiden of the Aqua deck. I've leveled up my leader so that it boosts all my nearby Aquas by 400 attack and defense. I've duplicated the cards that power up my own water monsters. And I've duplicated cards that create water on the field. And with all my boosts, I have a 4100 attack giant red sea snake that will attack over pretty much anything I come across. Fairies are an extremely strong deck when buffed up, and simply by obtaining a copy of Dancing Elf and Wing Egg Elf from the first duel on the White Rose side, I can create a bunch of copies of Mystical Elf as well by fusing an Elf with a low attack light fairy to buff up all of my light cards by 800 each with Mystical Elf's effect. My deck leader also instantly destroys fiends just by existing, and also spellbind zombies, and that's just hilarious against enemies like Panic, Final Boss, and Necromance for example. And when it comes to a duel like Mai, who is normally a wall, I have duplicates of my trap cards to stop her from attacking me as I set up boost to create a 3600 attack Dark Witch, and then eventually I just create a 4000 attack Air Knight Parshaft and attack her directly with that and end the duel. And for the last example, let's bully Pegasus to get revenge on him from our childhood playthroughs, so I do have to get to him first, but that's not really a problem because any insect gets instantly destroyed just because my deck leader exists and has a high rank. And that still doesn't stop me from setting up monsters that have 4000 attack, including a Sinister Serpent that I boosted from 300 attack to 3500, including the effects of my Serpentine Princess that boosts all reptiles by 900, so if I flip 3 of these guys up, I have 2700 attack and defense boost to all of my reptiles. Anyways, now that we're at Pegasus, I'm just gonna approach him slowly and use any cards such as Paralyzing Potion to fake out his trap cards, bait his own monsters into being stunned. He's gonna try to attack my Paralyzing Potion with an Aqua, but it gets permanently spellbound when it's near my deck leader because my deck leader just exists on the field. And once I'm near him, I can just full send a Toon Alligator at him that's been buffed into Oblivion and just completely destroy him with direct attacks on Toon Terrain, and there's just nothing he can really do about this, and the duel is just completely over. And that is how to become overpowered at the start of Duels of the Roses. But if you want to know what the most overpowered starter deck actually is, I've already made a whole video on that, so if you want to watch it, go check it out.